This bias is called the availability heuristic. And the availability heuristic is a aspect of your memory. When you think about how likely is something to happen, the availability heuristic says that you don't use a broad statistical way of determining that. Like the United States Census sends out mail and measures things from millions and millions of people to get a very accurate statistical idea of how things work. So the availability heuristic is the tendency to get false statistical patterns based on only sampling or only getting data from a biased source. So somebody lives in New York City, they're going to get a bias based on New York City. If they're in Texas or in California, they're going to get a bias there. This kind of bias can exist not just geographically, but what do you hear about? Do you hear about plane crashes? Or do you hear about car crashes? And which do you think is more dangerous? The statistics say that flying in a plane is much safer. But when people are thinking about what can happen, they're usually much more afraid of a plane than going in the car, even though the car is much more dangerous. So the availability heuristic happens because people hear about they don't hear about car crashes. It's just sort of an everyday thing that nobody talks about on the news. But on TV, anytime there's anything about a plane crash, that's on the news. And so you hear about it. And so the news that you hear about is a selection out of the broad range of things that happen each day. And the availability heuristic says what's available to you, what you hear about, and what sticks in your memory. And those things that stick in your memory tend to be things that are highly emotional, highly charged emotionally, things that are unusual, things that are vivid in some way. Those things tend to stick in your memory. And so that's what is available to you. Because remember, all the stuff that happens to you, you only remember a very small amount of it. And so what goes from what happens to you into that very small percentage that you actually retain, that's part of the availability heuristic. When you think about how likely is something to happen, you go into your memory, you think about what are all the different examples I can think about, and then the availability heuristic means that you're using that very biased source to overestimate the likelihood of something happening just because it comes to mind easier. And it's a heuristic, and it's not a rule or a law because it's not something you can count on as statistically valid. So when you think about statistical validity, think about you have everybody in the country vote, or you have everybody in the country get measured by the census, and then you have an accurate full picture that doesn't have bias or has very limited controlled bias.